Hey, I'm Hunt, and this is Hunt on LSU, your channel for LSU Fighting Tiger football talk. Enjoy the video. We want you to leave a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe right below the video. Enjoy. What we don't know from LSU's perspective is just how many players on LSU's side are going to enter the transfer portal. We're just not sure yet. We've seen Trey Bradford jump in the transfer portal. Bryce Langston is in the transfer portal. There haven't been any high-level starting caliber players that have jumped, but you figure there's a likelihood that's going to happen. I'm not suggesting I know anything, but that's just the way things go in college football. So any thoughts that I have on what LSU needs in the transfer portal and where they need to go can change by the minute based on one player saying he's coming back or one player saying I'm going to the transfer portal, and that changes the way you've got to look at your roster. I feel like Brian Kelly's probably got a pretty good handle on that, as we just played in the last segment, but we don't because we're not having those exit interviews. So my first thought when I think about what does LSU need to go be aggressive in the transfer portal and get is defensive line, specifically interior defensive line. Now, if Mekhi Wingo and Mason Smith tell me that they're both coming back, then that changes the discussion a little bit because those are starting caliber players in the SEC. Wingo did it at an all-conference level, and Mason Smith started to come on a little bit towards the end of the year after that injury. If you take out your expectation level for Mason Smith, which I was a part of, I've talked up Mason Smith for 2 years. Brian Kelly has been a part of. He's talked up Mason Smith for 2 years, recruiting analysts and all that kind of stuff, slapped a 5-star grade on him, and so we all share a little bit of blame in that. But if you take that away and you just look at the production on the field, like, he got a little bit better as time went on, and there's reason to think that if he stays healthy in an offseason, he could come back and play better football next year than he has for the first 3 years that he's been on campus. Certainly being a freshman hampers that, and then coming off a major injury hampers that as well. So, but if you lose both of those guys, like, it's crisis mode at defensive tackle because Jordan Jefferson's out of eligibility. He's moving on. I misspoke last week when I was talking about him having a year left. He played 6 years in the COVID year. That's the year that he returns, but he played in 19, then he played in 21, 22, and 23. So there's 4 years right here. By my understanding, Jordan Jefferson is out of eligibility. So, Jacobian Guillory is a nice depth piece. He can come back if he wants to. Jalen Lee can come back. He didn't play very much this year. Bryce Langston's in the transfer portal. You brought in Sean Washington in this signing class as a junior college player, and you figure that he can help. But, like, right now, if Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo left, and I don't know if they are or not, you might have a starting defensive tackle tandem of Jacobian Guillory and Sean Washington. I'm not ready to go to battle with that, quite simply. So, in my estimation, LSU needs to work the transfer portal for a big-time defensive tackle prospect that can come in and potentially be a starter-level player. If you just need to add some depth and you can actually go into next year with Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo and Jacobian Guillory and Sean Washington, and you've got 4 guys, then that's a good starting point. I'd still like to add another one. You just can't have enough big physical space eaters on the defensive front. I can find wide receivers and running backs pretty quick. It's harder to find interior defensive linemen that can play at an SEC level. So I would like LSU to go shopping in the transfer portal there. I think certainly the secondary is somewhere that I think the talent level needs to be raised a little bit, quite frankly. As I look at this roster, I see 13 guys who could very well be on the roster next year. Now, that's a lot of guys in the secondary. Sage Ryan, Javian Toviano, Ashton Stamps, Zy Alexander, Jeremiah Hughes, Major Burns, Jordan Allen as the freshman class, Juwan Johnson, Wallace Foster, Bernard Causey, Deshaun McBride, Joel Rogers, P.J. Woodland. Like, that's 13 guys, and that's a lot. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those are freshmen. And the other group is a group that you had out there this year, and I know they'll be a year older next year, but are you comfortable running that back? And I'm not. So they've got to find Mekhi Garner and Jarek Bernard-Converse again. They've got to go find at least one guy that can cover in the SEC. And I'll take safeties and nickels as well. Like Jordan Gilbert's in the portal. He's a U-High product who started at Texas A&M until he got hurt last year. Is an SEC level player. Could you bring him back home? Fine. I don't want to get married to the fact that every time you go into the transfer portal and sign somebody, they played in Louisiana high school and you passed on them. But that was the case for Mekhi Garner and Jarek Bernard-Converse, and that worked pretty well. So you've got to find something in the secondary that gives you a little bit more than what you had this year. I'm good bringing Sage Ryan back, and maybe Javian Toviano and Ashton Stamps and Zy Alexander one more year playing in this LSU's program, kind of take a step and become the guys that you need. But I would really like to go into the transfer portal and find one or two that I felt really good about. And hopefully you hit on a freshman or two as well, and that defensive backfield kind of takes shape. And the last position I want to talk about, and I would take a quarterback out of the transfer portal too. There are very few positions where I would say you really don't need to do anything in the transfer portal there. If there's a good player available that's interested in you, LSU should be working that for sure, no matter the position. But there's one position that I think, based on a talent level, you wouldn't say LSU needs to get into the transfer portal. But maybe on a proven production level, it would make sense for LSU to hop in the transfer portal, and that's at wide receiver. You understand that Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors are not going to be back next year. Now, Kyron Lacey can come back. Aaron Anderson can't go pro, so he's back. Chris Hilton can come back, and those are three guys who have played. Lacey was a really solid 3 this year. Maybe Anderson gets a little healthier and shows a little more burst. And Hilton stays healthy and is a really explosive player who's been kind of pushed down on the depth chart. And then you brought in a really talented group of freshmen this year. Shelton Sampson, 4 or 5 star, depending on where you look. Jalen Brown, unbelievable speed guy from Miami. Kyle Parker, kind of a technician who's a really good route runner, very productive over in Texas in his high school career. Kai Preen is a great athlete from right down the river. So that's a lot of talent right there with those 4 guys, but there's no proven production at all. And then you bring in a freshman class with Jelani Watkins and Kylan Billiot and Michael Turner, and that's a lot of numbers. That's 10 guys at wide receiver, and I didn't even mention Landon Ibieta there, who hasn't played very much. But if there's an all-conference guy from the MAC or somebody you can bring in from a big-time program that wants another look, I mean, Evan Stewart's looking around apparently and from Texas A&M. Like, if there's somebody like that that's available that I can pair with Kyron Lacey and then put Aaron Anderson and Chris Hilton and maybe 2 of those 4 that were freshmen this year, maybe Sampson and Jalen Brown emerge, and then you're ready. I don't know if you're Neighbors and Thomas, you're not Chasen and Jefferson. We're talking pie in the sky. You're not Beckham and Landry, but I think you can upgrade the proven production in that wide receiver room. Maybe they've seen enough in practice and they don't need to. But this one is a little different than the secondary and the D-line where you have to make changes. They simply weren't good enough. This is like, I just don't know. I don't know if LSU's got 4 good SEC receivers. I think the recruiting rankings would suggest that. The talent level would suggest that, but you just don't know. So that's where I wouldn't mind LSU finding a wide receiver in the transfer portal. And then I'll just toss in here this here at the end. Like, if LSU doesn't get a quarterback in the transfer portal, I think that's a mistake. I said last week I didn't think they would do it, and I still don't know if they will or not. But I think you need to. And even if it's just Spencer Sanders coming from Oklahoma State to Ole Miss and he sits on the bench, that's fine. Even if it's Texas A&M bringing in Max Johnson, even though Connor Wigman's the starter, that's fine. Depth is fine, especially at a proven level. So I'll take a transfer quarterback every single year if that's what it takes. And I realize that some people think that's going to scare off younger quarterbacks. Not fair to the guys you signed. It's going to send them out the door. Like, I don't care. It's the most important position, and I'm just not willing to have Garrett Nussmeier go down and then turn immediately to Ricky Collins, who's played 15 snaps. That's not where I think LSU should put itself. You need to add experience at the quarterback spot, and not all transfer quarterbacks start. Just routed off a few examples right there. Took JT Daniels like 4 different stops to find a starting spot. If you don't win the job, you don't win the job. But I think that LSU should go to quarterback. So for me, Secondary is where you got to start, and defensive line as well. Those two have got to be shored up with numbers and with talent. And then I would potentially look at some wide receivers, and you got to find a quarterback. Now, it may be hard to find a quarterback that's willing to show up with very little assurances of starting, but I would look into that in a big way. Transfer quarterbacks have had some success at LSU. There's going to be a second Heisman Trophy that shows up on Saturday to prove that. So you ought to have something pretty salty to sell there. So hey, thanks for watching Hunt on LSU. Before you get out of here, do us a couple of favors. Hit that like button, leave your comments below, and subscribe to the channel for all your Fighting Tiger football talk. See you next time.